Ravi woke up every morning before the sun came up. Not because he wanted to, but because that's just how life worked in his small village. The rooster from the neighbor's yard would start making noise around 5 in the morning, and that was his alarm clock. No snooze button, no 5 more minutes. Just the sound of a rooster telling him it was time to start another day. He'd sit up on his thin mattress on the floor, careful not to wake his little sister sleeping next to him. Their room wasn't really a room, more like a corner of their small house separated by a curtain his mother had stitched together from old saris. Through the gaps in the curtain, he could already see his mother moving around in the kitchen area, getting ready to make tea. The floor was cold under his feet, not the kind of cold that makes you jump, but the kind that reminds you that you're awake now, whether you like it or not. Ravi would fold his blanket, splash some water on his face from the bucket near the door, and put on his school uniform. The shirt was getting tight around his shoulders because he was growing, but new uniforms cost money they didn't have right now. So he'd wear it until his mother could save enough or until it literally didn't fit anymore. Before school there were chores, always chores. Not the kind where your parents ask you to clean your room and you can do it later. These were the kind of chores that had to be done, or the family wouldn't have water to drink or food to cook. Ravi would grab the 2 metal containers by the door and walk to the community well about 10 minutes from their house. The path was all dirt and rocks, and during monsoon season it turned into mud that stuck to everything. But this was September, so the ground was dry and dusty. The well was where everyone from the nearby houses came to get water. Early morning was the best time because there wasn't a long line yet. Ravi would lower the bucket down, hear the splash, then pull it back up using the rope. His arms used to hurt when he first started doing this at age 8, but now at 12 he barely noticed. Fill one container, then the other. The walk back home was slower because the containers were heavy, and he had to be careful not to spill too much. His father was usually getting ready to leave when Ravi got back with the water. His father drove a cycle rickshaw in Pune City, which meant he'd peddle tourists and shoppers around all day long. He'd leave their village before dawn and come back after dark, and Ravi could tell just by looking at his face how tired he was. His father's hands had calluses on top of calluses, and his back was always a little bent even when he was standing straight. They didn't talk much in the mornings. His father would drink his tea quickly, grab the lunch his mother had packed in a small steel container, and head out. But before leaving, he'd always put his hand on Ravi's head for just a second. It was his way of saying something without words. Something like study hard or make something of yourself, or maybe just, I love you. Ravi never really knew which one, but it didn't matter. He understood. Breakfast was usually the same thing. Roti from the night before with some tea. Sometimes there was a little bit of vegetable curry left over, which made it a good day. Sometimes there wasn't, which made it a regular day. Ravi never complained. He saw how his mother counted coins before going to the market. Saw how she'd buy vegetables that were a little old because they were cheaper. Saw how she'd serve everyone else before taking anything for herself. School was about 15 kilometers away from their village. That's a long way when you don't have a car or even a bicycle. There was a public bus that came through, but it was always packed with people going to work or other students going to school. Ravi would walk to the bus stop, wait with a bunch of other kids, and then squeeze into whatever space was available when the bus finally arrived. The bus ride made him feel sick sometimes. All the bumps on the road, all the people pressed together, the smell of diesel and sweat and someone's breakfast. But it was better than walking 15 kilometers. Some kids in even poorer villages than his had to walk that far. At least he had a bus, even if it was crowded and smelly and late most of the time. He'd get to school just as the bell was ringing, or sometimes a few minutes after. The security guard knew him by now and would just wave him through instead of making him wait outside like he did with other late students. Ravi would rush to his classroom, slide into his seat in the 3rd row, and pull out his notebook and pencil. That's where Mrs. Deshmukh came in. She taught mathematics, and something about her was different from the other teachers. Most teachers would just write on the board and talk at you, not really caring if you understood or not. But Mrs. Deshmukh would look at you. Actually look at you. And if she saw confusion on your face, she'd stop and explain it differently. She'd noticed Ravi struggling a few months ago. He wasn't bad at math, but he wasn't good either. He was somewhere in the middle, and middle meant invisible in a class of 45 students. But Mrs. Deshmukh saw him anyway. One day after school, she'd asked him to stay back. Ravi thought he was in trouble. Turns out she just wanted to help. She started staying after school twice a week to tutor him and a few other students who needed extra help. She didn't ask for money. She didn't make them feel stupid. She just taught with patience that seemed endless. She'd even brought him a new notebook once when she saw him writing in the margins of his old one because he'd run out of pages. "Here," she'd said, placing it on his desk like it was no big deal. But it was a big deal to Ravi. Nobody outside his family had ever just given him something because they wanted to help. That's why what happened on Tuesday felt even worse. That's why the math exam sitting on his desk, turned face down, felt like a weight pressing on his chest. That's why he couldn't bring himself to flip it over even though he knew Mrs. Deshmukh had already seen his score. He'd failed. Not just barely failed, but really failed. And the worst part wasn't the grade itself. The worst part was knowing that Mrs. Deshmukh had spent hours of her own time helping him, and he'd still failed. The worst part was feeling like he'd let down the one person who believed he could be more than just another poor kid from a village who'd probably drop out, eventually to work on a farm or drive a rickshaw like his father. When the final bell rang that day, Ravi packed his bag slowly. He could see Mrs. Deshmukh at her desk organizing papers. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to explain. He wanted to say something, but his throat felt tight, and he wasn't sure he could talk without his voice shaking, so he just left. Walked out of the classroom with his head down, merged into the crowd of students rushing to catch their buses home, and tried very hard not to think about the disappointed look he'd imagined on Mrs. Deshmukh's face. The bus ride home felt longer than usual. Ravi sat by the window, his backpack clutched on his lap, staring at the passing fields without really seeing them. The exam paper was in his bag, folded into a small square so nobody could accidentally see it. He'd scored 32 out of 100. 32. He needed at least 35 just to pass. 3 marks. He'd failed by just 3 marks. Somehow that made it worse. If he'd scored 10 or 15, he could have told himself he never had a chance anyway. But 3 marks meant he'd been so close. 3 marks meant if he'd just tried a little harder, paid attention a little more, practiced a few more problems, he might have made it. When the bus dropped him at his village stop, Ravi walked home slowly. The sun was still up, beating down on the dirt road. A few kids were playing cricket in an empty field nearby, using a stick as a bat and a tennis ball wrapped in tape. One of them called out to Ravi, asking if he wanted to join. He just shook his head and kept walking. His mother was outside their house, hanging wet clothes on a rope stretched between 2 trees. She looked up when she heard his footsteps and smiled. That smile made everything worse. She smiled like she was proud of him just for going to school, just for trying. What would she think when she found out he'd failed? Would she still smile like that? "How was school?" she asked, clipping a shirt to the line. "Fine," Ravi said, which wasn't a complete lie. School had been fine. It was just his performance that wasn't. "Are you hungry? I saved some rice and dal for you." "Not really hungry right now." His mother turned to look at him properly then, her hands pausing mid-motion. She had that mother superpower where she could tell something was wrong, just by looking at you. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just tired. Long day." She studied his face for another moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay. Food is inside if you change your mind." Ravi went into the house, dropped his bag in the corner, and lay down on his mattress. His sister wasn't home yet. She went to a different school, closer to the village, and usually played with her friends for a while before coming home. The house was quiet except for the sound of his mother moving around outside. He pulled the exam paper out of his bag and unfolded it. Seeing the score in red ink made his stomach hurt. Mrs. Deshmukh had written a note at the top. "See me after class." He'd avoided doing that. Instead, he'd practically run out of the school when the day ended. What was he supposed to say to her? "Thank you for wasting your time on me. Sorry I'm too stupid to understand math." He knew she'd tell him it was okay, that he could try again, that one exam didn't define him. But those were just things teachers were supposed to say. Deep down, she probably thought he was hopeless. The worst part was remembering something she'd told him once during their tutoring sessions. They'd been working on a particularly difficult problem, and Ravi had wanted to give up. Mrs. Deshmukh had put down her pen and said, "You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who's going to make it out." "Make it out of what?" Ravi had asked. "This cycle, poverty, struggle. You have something special, Ravi. You care about learning. You show up even when it's hard. That's more valuable than being naturally smart. He'd felt 10 feet tall when she said that, like maybe she was right. Like maybe he could be more than his circumstances. But now, looking at his failed exam, those words felt hollow. How was he supposed to make it out of anything if he couldn't even pass a basic math test? His mother came inside after a while. She sat down near him and started folding the dry clothes from earlier. Ravi kept his face turned toward the wall, pretending to sleep. He heard her moving around, humming quietly to herself. She always hummed when she worked. It was usually comforting, but today it just made him feel more guilty. When his father came home that night, it was already dark. Ravi heard the familiar sound of the front door opening, his father's heavy footsteps, the sigh that always came when he finally sat down after a long day. Dinner was quiet. His sister chattered about something that happened at her school, but Ravi barely listened. He pushed his rice around his plate, eating just enough so his mother wouldn't worry. "You're quiet tonight," his father said, looking at him across the small space where they all sat on the floor to eat. "Just thinking about homework," Ravi lied. His father nodded and went back to eating. He was too tired to press for more information, which Ravi was grateful for. After dinner, while his mother cleaned up and his sister got ready for bed, Ravi went outside and sat on the step in front of their house. The village at night was different from the city. There were no streetlights, just whatever light came from people's houses and the moon when it was out. You could see more stars here than you'd ever see in Pune. Ravi looked up at them and thought about all the things Mrs. Deshmukh had taught him, all the time she'd spent explaining concepts he didn't understand, all the patience she'd shown, and he'd repaid her by failing. The next morning, Ravi didn't want to go to school. He thought about pretending to be sick, but his mother would see right through that. She might even waste money taking him to the doctor, and he couldn't let that happen over something as stupid as not wanting to face his teacher. So he went through his morning routine like always. Got water from the well, had his breakfast, caught the crowded bus, walked into school just as the bell was ringing. But when he got to his classroom and saw Mrs. Deshmukh already there, writing the day's lesson on the board, his feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. He forced himself to walk to his seat. Mrs. Deshmukh glanced over at him, and for a second their eyes met. She gave him a small smile, the kind that said, "We need to talk later." And Ravi quickly looked down at his desk. The whole day was torture. Every class felt like it lasted forever. He couldn't concentrate on anything the teachers were saying. His mind kept going back to that exam, to Mrs. Deshmukh's disappointed face, to the feeling that he'd ruined everything. When the lunch break came, Ravi stayed in his seat while everyone else went outside. He pulled out the roti his mother had packed for him, but he wasn't hungry. He just sat there staring at it until he heard footsteps approaching. "Ravi?" Mrs. Deshmukh's voice was soft. "Can we talk?" His heart started beating faster. This was it. This was where she'd tell him that maybe tutoring wasn't helping, that maybe he should focus on something other than school, that maybe he just wasn't cut out for education. "I know you're upset about the exam," she said, sitting down at the desk next to his, "but I want you to know something. This doesn't change anything." Ravi looked at her, confused. "But I failed. After everything you taught me, I still failed." "One exam, Ravi, you failed one exam. Do you know how many exams I failed when I was your age? More than I can count. But those failures taught me more than my successes ever did. But you spent so much time helping me. I wasted your time." Mrs. Deshmukh shook her head firmly. "You didn't waste anything. Teaching isn't about making students pass exams. It's about helping them learn, helping them grow. And you have grown. I see it in how you approach problems now, how you think things through instead of just guessing. Then why did I fail? Because you're learning, and learning means making mistakes. It means falling down sometimes. The question isn't whether you fall. The question is whether you get back up." Ravi felt his eyes getting hot the way they do right before you start crying. He blinked hard, trying to stop it. "I don't know if I can. Get back up, I mean. What if I just keep failing? Then you keep trying. You know what the difference is between students who make it and students who don't? It's not how smart they are. It's how stubborn they are about not giving up." She reached into her bag and pulled out his exam paper. "Look at this with me. Let's see where you went wrong. Not because I want to make you feel bad, but because I want you to learn from it." And she did. Right there during lunch break, while other students played outside, Mrs. Deshmukh went through each problem he'd gotten wrong. She showed him where his thinking had gone off track, which concepts he needed to review, what he'd actually understood correctly even if his final answer was wrong. By the time the bell rang for the next class, Ravi felt a little bit better. Not great, but better. Mrs. Deshmukh had a way of making failures feel less like the end of the world and more like just another step in learning. But even so, as he sat through the rest of his classes that day, something heavy settled in his chest. It was gratitude mixed with guilt, mixed with determination, mixed with fear. Mrs. Deshmukh believed in him when she had no reason to. She spent her free time helping him when she could have been home with her own family. She never made him feel small even when he was struggling. And he couldn't find the words to tell her any of that. Every time he tried to imagine saying thank you, it felt too small. Thank you didn't cover what she'd done for him. Thank you didn't express how much her faith in him mattered. On the bus ride home, Ravi made a decision. Words weren't enough. He needed to show her somehow. He needed to make her understand that he wouldn't give up, that her time hadn't been wasted, that he was going to keep trying no matter how many times he failed. He just didn't know how yet. That night, Ravi couldn't sleep. He lay on his mattress staring at the ceiling, listening to his sister's quiet breathing next to him and the distant sound of dogs barking somewhere in the village. His mind kept turning over the same question again and again. How do you thank someone for believing in you when you barely believe in yourself? He thought about the time Mrs. Deshmukh had shared her lunch with him. It was about 2 months ago on a day when Ravi had come to school with nothing to eat. His mother had been sick, and his father had left early without realizing nobody had packed lunches. Ravi hadn't said anything to anyone. He just sat at his desk during lunch break pretending he wasn't hungry, pretending the smell of other kids' food didn't make his stomach hurt. But Mrs. Deshmukh noticed. She always noticed. She'd quietly placed half her lunch on his desk, wrapped in aluminum foil. I packed too much today, she'd said, even though they both knew that wasn't true. Ravi had wanted to refuse, but the hunger won. The food was simple, just rice and vegetables, but it tasted better than anything because of the kindness it carried with it. He thought about all the notebooks she'd given him, always with the same excuse. I bought too many. Or, these were extra from last year. He thought about the times she'd stayed at school until 6 in the evening, tutoring him and 3 other students who were struggling, never once checking her watch or acting like she had somewhere better to be. As the night wore on and sleep refused to come, an idea started forming in Ravi's mind. It was probably a stupid idea. His mother would definitely call it a stupid idea. But once it was there, he couldn't shake it. He knew Mrs. Deshmukh lived somewhere near Wagholi. He'd heard his father mention it once when they passed through that area on a bus. His father had pointed vaguely in a direction and said, "That's where your teacher lives, near the old Shiva temple." Wagholi wasn't terribly far, maybe 15 or 20 kilometers. In a rickshaw or bus, it wouldn't take long at all. But Ravi didn't have money for a rickshaw. He had 20 rupees saved from his birthday 3 months ago, which his grandmother had given him. 20 rupees would barely cover a bus ride one way, and even then, he wasn't sure which bus went to Wagholi or where exactly Mrs. Deshmukh's house was. What if he walked? The idea was crazy. 15 or 20 kilometers was a long way. He'd never walked that far in his life. But people did it, didn't they? He'd heard stories of people walking for days to get to religious sites. Surely he could walk for a few hours to do something important. And this was important. This was about showing Mrs. Deshmukh that he wasn't giving up. This was about thanking her properly, face to face, in a way that showed he'd made an effort. If he just said thank you at school, surrounded by other students with classes about to start and both of them in a hurry, it wouldn't mean anything. But if he went to her house, if he took the time to find her and speak to her when she wasn't expecting it, maybe that would show her how much her help mattered. By the time the rooster started crowing the next morning, Ravi had made up his mind. Today was Saturday, no school. His parents would think he was going out to play with friends, which he sometimes did on weekends. He'd leave early, find Mrs. Deshmukh's house, say what he needed to say, and be back before dinner. Simple. Except it wasn't simple at all, and Ravi knew it. But knowing something is difficult has never stopped anyone from trying. He got up quietly, careful not to wake his sister. His mother was already in the kitchen area making tea. "You're up early for a Saturday," she said, looking surprised. "Thought I'd go play cricket with some friends," Ravi said, the lie coming out smoother than he expected. His mother nodded, stirring the tea. Don't go too far. And be back for lunch. I will, Ravi said, feeling guilty about lying but knowing there was no way she'd let him go if he told the truth. He found an old water bottle, the plastic kind that used to hold some soft drink, but now served as their regular water container. He filled it from the pot of filtered water his mother kept covered with a cloth. Then he took the 20 rupees from where he'd hidden them in his notebook and put them in his pocket. His mother handed him a cup of tea. Eat something before you go. I'll eat when I get back, Ravi said. My friends are waiting for me. Another lie. The guilt was building up in his chest, but he pushed it down. He'd apologize later when he got back. Right now he needed to go before he lost his nerve. He left the house just as the sun was starting to rise properly, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The village was quiet except for the usual morning sounds. Roosters crowing, someone's buffalo making noise, the distant sound of a tractor starting up in the fields. Ravi headed toward the main road that connected their village to the highway. He'd walked this path hundreds of times to catch the school bus, but today it felt different. Today it was the beginning of something longer. When he reached the main road, he paused. Which direction? He tried to remember what his father had said, tried to picture the bus route when they occasionally went to Pune for shopping. Wagholi was on the way to Pune, he was pretty sure, so he needed to go toward the city and then look for signs. He started walking. The road was mostly empty this early on a Saturday. A few trucks passed by carrying vegetables to the city markets. A man on a motorcycle zoomed past, kicking up dust. Ravi kept to the side of the road, walking steadily. After about 30 minutes, he reached a small tea stall that was just opening up. An old man was setting up chairs and wiping down the tables. Little early for a boy to be out walking alone, the old man said. Going to visit my teacher, Ravi said, which was true even if it left out a lot of details. Teacher must live far if you're walking, the old man observed. Near Wagholi, Ravi said. Do you know which way? The old man pointed down the road. Follow this until you reach the highway junction. Take the right fork. Keep going through Lani village, then through Fursungi. Wagholi is after that, but that's a long walk, son. Why don't you wait for a bus? I want to walk, Ravi said. Thank you for the directions. The old man shook his head like Ravi was crazy, but he didn't try to stop him. Ravi kept going. The sun got higher and hotter. The water bottle that had seemed full when he left home was already half empty. His sandals, which were comfortable enough for walking around the village, started rubbing against his heels in a way that promised blisters. But Ravi didn't stop. He thought about Mrs. Deshmukh, about how she never gave up on him, and he kept walking. He passed through areas he'd only ever seen from bus windows. Small shops were opening, pulling up their shutters with loud clanging sounds. Women were sweeping the areas in front of their houses. Kids were playing in yards. Normal Saturday morning life happening all around him. At the highway junction, Ravi took the right fork like the tea stall man had told him. The road got busier here. More vehicles, more noise. He had to be more careful to stay well off to the side. A bus passed by, and for a moment Ravi thought about flagging it down, using his 20 rupees to ride instead of walk. But he didn't. This journey needed to be on foot. He wasn't entirely sure why, but he knew it in his bones. As he walked through Lani village, a woman at a bus stop called out to him. Where are you going, child? Wagholi, Ravi said. That's far. Are you lost? No, just going to see someone. The woman looked concerned but didn't press further. She did, however, reach into her bag and pull out a banana. Here, you look like you could use something to eat. Ravi hesitated, then took it. Thank you. Be careful on the roads, the woman said. Lots of crazy drivers. The banana helped. It gave him energy and made his stomach stop complaining quite so loudly. He kept walking. By the time he reached Fursungi, his feet were definitely developing blisters. Each step was starting to hurt. The sun was high overhead now, probably around noon. His water bottle was empty. He refilled it at a public tap near a temple, not caring that the water tasted slightly metallic and warm. A truck driver who was parked nearby eating lunch called out to him. Hey boy, you walking to somewhere? Wagholi, Ravi said. Wagholi? That's still a good distance. I'm heading that way. Want a ride? For a second, Ravi was tempted. His feet hurt. He was tired. The sun was brutal. But then he thought about why he was doing this in the first place. It wasn't just about reaching Mrs. Deshmukh's house. It was about the effort. It was about proving something to himself as much as to her. Thank you, but I want to walk, Ravi said. The truck driver shrugged like he'd seen stranger things. Your choice. Stay safe, Ravi kept going. His legs were getting tired now, a deep ache settling into his muscles. The blisters on his feet were definitely bleeding. He could feel the dampness inside his sandals. But he was close now. He had to be. He'd been walking for hours. He asked a shopkeeper for directions. Wagholi? Just ahead. About 2 more kilometers. 2 more kilometers. Ravi could do 2 more kilometers. He'd come this far. He wasn't going to stop now. As he walked those final kilometers, his mind drifted. He thought about what he'd say to Mrs. Deshmukh. Would she be angry that he'd walked so far? Would she think he was crazy? Would she even be home? That last thought made him stumble. What if she wasn't home? What if he'd walked all this way and she was out shopping or visiting relatives or doing any of the 100 things people do on Saturday mornings? But it was too late to worry about that now. He was almost there. He just needed to find the old Shiva temple his father had mentioned. And then he could ask around for Mrs. Deshmukh's house. Teachers were usually well known in their communities. Someone would know where she lived. Finally, after what felt like forever, Ravi saw the temple. It was old, like his father had said, with faded paint and weathered stone. There were a few people around, and Ravi approached an elderly man who was sitting on the temple steps. Excuse me, do you know where Mrs. Deshmukh lives? She's a teacher. The old man thought for a moment. Deshmukh. Yes, the mathematics teacher. Her house is just down that lane, third one on the right, Blue Gate. Ravi felt a surge of relief so strong it almost made him dizzy. He thanked the man and headed toward the lane. His heart was beating fast now, not from walking but from nervousness. He was actually going to do this. He was actually here. The house with the blue gate looked modest and well kept. There was a small garden in front with some flowering plants. Through the window, Ravi could see movement inside. Someone was home. He walked up to the gate, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for it. His feet were screaming in pain. His whole body ached. His lips were cracked from sun and not enough water. But he'd made it. He knocked on the gate. Mrs. Deshmukh was chopping vegetables in her kitchen when she heard the knock on the gate. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her husband had gone to the market, and their children were at their grandmother's house for the weekend. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the door, wondering who could be visiting on a Saturday afternoon. When she opened the gate, she froze. Standing there, looking like he'd walked through a desert, was Ravi. Her student Ravi, sunburned, sweaty, covered in dust and swaying slightly on his feet like he might fall over any second. Ravi? She couldn't keep the shock out of her voice. What? How did you get here? I walked, Ravi said, and his voice came out raspy, like his throat was too dry for speaking. Mrs. Deshmukh's teacher instincts kicked in immediately. She took in his condition in seconds. The way he was standing put more weight on one foot than the other. The dried sweat marks on his shirt. The water bottle hanging from his hand that was clearly empty. The slight glaze in his eyes that meant dehydration. Come inside, right now. She put her hand on his shoulder and guided him through the gate and into her house. Sit down. Don't move. Ravi sank onto the sofa in her living room, and the moment he was off his feet, he realized just how exhausted he was. His legs were shaking. His feet felt like they were on fire. The room tilted slightly, and he had to close his eyes for a second. Mrs. Deshmukh's husband had just returned from the market. He took one look at Ravi and immediately understood something was wrong. I'll get water, he said, disappearing into the kitchen. Mrs. Deshmukh knelt down in front of Ravi. How far did you walk? From my village. Near Lani. Her face went pale. That's at least 15 kilometers. Maybe more. Ravi, why? Why would you do that? But Ravi couldn't answer yet because her husband had returned with a glass of water, and he was so thirsty the words died in his throat. He drank the whole glass in practically one gulp. Then another glass, then a third, slower this time. Let me see your feet, Mrs. Deshmukh said gently. Ravi hesitated, then slipped off his sandals. His feet were a mess. Blisters had formed and burst on both heels. There was blood mixed with dust. His toes were red and swollen. Mrs. Deshmukh made a small sound of distress. Wait here. She got up and went to another room, returning with a first aid kit and a basin of warm water. Her husband brought a clean towel. This is going to sting, she warned, then started cleaning his feet gently. Ravi bit his lip to keep from making any noise. It did sting. It stung a lot. But he'd walked all this way. He could handle this. As she worked, cleaning the wounds and applying antiseptic cream and bandages, she kept glancing up at his face. Your parents know you're here? Ravi shook his head, feeling the guilt come rushing back. I told my mother I was going to play with friends. She thinks I'll be back for lunch. Ravi, it's already past 1 o'clock. He looked at the clock on the wall. She was right. He'd been walking for over 5 hours. His mother was probably starting to worry by now. We need to call her, Mrs. Deshmukh said. We don't have a phone, Ravi admitted quietly. Mrs. Deshmukh finished bandaging his feet and sat back. Okay, we'll figure that out. But first you need to tell me why you did this. Why did you walk all this way? This was it. This was the moment Ravi had been walking toward. But now that he was here, sitting on his teacher's sofa with his feet bandaged and his whole body aching, the words seemed stuck somewhere between his brain and his mouth. He started, then stopped. I needed to say thank you. Mrs. Deshmukh looked confused. Thank you for what? For everything. For helping me with math. For staying after school. For the notebooks. For sharing your lunch that day. For not giving up on me even though I failed the exam. The words started coming faster now. You told me I was going to make it out. You said you saw something special in me. And I failed, and I thought you'd be so disappointed, and I couldn't just say thank you at school because that wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't show you that I meant it. His voice cracked a little on that last part, and he had to stop talking because his eyes were getting that hot feeling again. Mrs. Deshmukh was very quiet for a long moment. When Ravi finally looked up at her, he was surprised to see that her eyes were shiny too. Oh, Ravi, she said softly, you didn't have to do this. You could have gotten seriously hurt walking all that way in this heat. But I wanted to. I needed to show you that I'm not giving up. That your time wasn't wasted. That I'm going to keep trying even if I fail sometimes. Mrs. Deshmukh moved to sit next to him on the sofa. Let me tell you something. When I was your age, I failed my first math exam too. Actually, I failed 3 exams in a row. My teacher had to spend extra time with me after school just like I do with you. And one day I asked her why she bothered. Why waste time on a student who kept failing? Ravi looked at her surprised. He'd never imagined Mrs. Deshmukh failing at anything. You know what she told me? Mrs. Deshmukh continued. She said that teaching isn't about making students pass exams. Teaching is about planting seeds. Some seeds grow fast. Some grow slow. But they all grow eventually if you give them enough water and sunlight and patience. She took his hands in hers. You didn't waste my time, Ravi, not even for a second. Every moment I spent helping you was worth it, because I saw those seeds growing. I saw you starting to understand concepts that confused you before. I saw you not giving up even when problems were hard. I saw you showing up for tutoring even when you could have gone home early with your friends. But I failed, Ravi said. You failed 1 exam. 1. Do you know how many exams you'll take in your life? Hundreds, thousands. This 1 exam doesn't define you. What defines you is this. She gestured at him, at his bandaged feet, at his tired face. This determination. This stubbornness. This willingness to walk 15 kilometers just to say thank you. Ravi felt something loosen in his chest. Some tight knot of worry and guilt that had been there since he'd seen his exam score. I've been teaching for 12 years, Mrs. Deshmukh said. I've had hundreds of students. Some were naturally brilliant. They'd understand concepts the first time I explained them. They'd score perfect marks on every exam. And you know what? I've lost touch with most of them. They went on to their successful lives, and that's wonderful. But they didn't need me. Not really, she squeezed his hands gently. But students like you? Students who have to fight for every mark? Students who don't give up even when things are hard? Those are the ones I remember. Those are the ones who teach me as much as I teach them. Those are the ones who remind me why I became a teacher in the first place. Really? Ravi's voice was small. Really? And let me tell you something else. This walk you took today? This shows me something I couldn't teach you even if I tried. It shows character. It shows determination. Those qualities will take you further in life than any exam score ever could. Her husband appeared with a plate of food. He needs to eat, he said to Mrs. Deshmukh. Then to Ravi, when did you last eat? I had a banana. Someone at a bus stop gave it to me. A banana, Mrs. Deshmukh's husband repeated, shaking his head. He set the plate down in front of Ravi. Eat, all of it. It was rice and vegetable curry. The kind of simple home-cooked meal that tasted amazing when you were hungry enough. Ravi ate slowly at first, then faster as his body realized how hungry it actually was. Mrs. Deshmukh and her husband watched, and neither of them said anything about how quickly he was eating or how he was practically inhaling the food. When he was done, Mrs. Deshmukh brought him another glass of water and some fruit. "Now," she said, "we need to get you home. Your mother must be worried sick by now." "I can walk back," Ravi started to say, but Mrs. Deshmukh cut him off. "Absolutely not. You're not walking anywhere with those feet. My husband will drive you home." "But I don't want to be any more trouble, Ravi," she said firmly. "You walked 15 kilometers to say thank you. The least I can do is make sure you get home safely. Besides, I need to talk to your mother and explain why you're late." The drive back to Ravi's village took about 45 minutes. Ravi sat in the back seat, watching the road he'd walked earlier pass by much more quickly. It had taken him over 5 hours to walk this distance, and now it was flying by in less than an hour. Somehow, that made the accomplishment feel even bigger. When they pulled up to his house, Ravi's mother was standing outside, her face tight with worry. The moment she saw the car, then saw Ravi getting out, relief and anger crossed her face in equal measures. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "I've been worried sick. I went to ask your friends if they'd seen you, and they said you never came to play." Mrs. Deshmukh got out of the car. "Mrs. Patil, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. Ravi came to visit me, and I should have made sure you knew where he was right away." Ravi's mother looked between her son and his teacher, confused. "Visit you? But you live in Wagholi," Mrs. Deshmukh finished. "Yes, he walked." The color drained from his mother's face. "He what?" What followed was a complicated conversation where Mrs. Deshmukh explained what had happened, and Ravi's mother kept switching between being angry at him for worrying her and being shocked that he'd walked so far. By the end of it, she was just holding Ravi close, her anger completely replaced by relief that he was okay. Before Mrs. Deshmukh left, she pulled something from her bag. It was a book, worn and well used, with advanced mathematics written on the cover. "This was mine when I was in college," she said, pressing it into Ravi's hands. "I want you to have it. Not to study from right now, but to keep as a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "That the distance between where you are and where you want to be isn't as far as it seems. Sometimes you just have to be willing to take the first step. Or the first few thousand steps in your case." She smiled at him, and Ravi smiled back. His feet hurt. He was exhausted. His mother was probably going to ground him for a week. But he felt lighter somehow, like he'd carried something heavy all the way to Wagholi and left it there. "Thank you," he said one more time. "No," Mrs. Deshmukh said. "Thank you for reminding me why I teach, for showing me that the seeds I plant do grow, and for being stubborn enough to walk 15 kilometers just to say what you could have said in a minute at school." She ruffled his hair gently. "Rest those feet. I'll see you Monday. We have more math to learn." As her car drove away, Ravi stood there holding the mathematics book, watching until the car disappeared around a corner. His mother put her arm around his shoulders and guided him inside, already talking about how they needed to check his feet and how he was going to tell his father about this adventure when he got home. But Ravi was barely listening. He was thinking about seeds growing, about the distance between here and there, about walking 15 kilometers to say thank you, and about how sometimes the longest journeys teach you things you didn't even know you needed to learn. That night, after his father came home and heard the whole story, after the initial shock and concern, and the lecture about never doing something so dangerous again, Ravi lay on his mattress with his bandaged feet elevated on a folded blanket. His whole body ached in a way he'd never experienced before, but it was a good ache, the kind that comes from pushing yourself further than you thought possible. His sister kept asking to see his feet, fascinated by the bandages. His mother kept checking on him every few minutes, bringing him water, asking if he needed anything. His father sat in the corner, shaking his head occasionally, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost like pride. "That was a foolish thing to do," his father said finally. "I know," Ravi admitted, "but I understand why you did it." His father paused, his calloused hands folded in his lap. "When I was about your age, there was a man in our village who taught me how to repair bicycles. I didn't have any money to pay him, but he taught me anyway. That skill helped me get my first job. I never properly thanked that man. He died a few years ago and I never got the chance. Ravi felt his throat get tight. His father rarely talked about his childhood, about the poverty and struggles that had marked his early life. That night, before sleep finally came, Ravi picked up the mathematics book Mrs. Deshmukh had given him and opened it to the first page. There was an inscription written in faded ink. To my younger self, every expert was once a beginner who refused to give up. Keep going. Ravi ran his fingers over the words. Mrs. Deshmukh had written this to herself, probably during those years when she was failing exams and struggling just like he was now. And look at her now. A teacher who changed lives. Maybe that's what he'd learned today. The distance between who you are and who you want to become isn't measured in kilometers at all. It's measured in small, stubborn steps, in refusing to give up, in saying thank you when words feel too small but saying them anyway. The weeks that followed were different somehow. Ravi still struggled with math. He still had to work twice as hard as some of his classmates. But something had shifted inside him. When problems seemed impossible, he'd think about walking to Wagholi, about how each step had felt difficult but had added up to something bigger. The next exam came 6 weeks later. Ravi studied harder than he'd ever studied before, not because he was afraid of failing, but because he wanted to honor the effort Mrs. Deshmukh put into teaching him. The day Mrs. Deshmukh handed back that exam, Ravi's hands shook as he turned over the paper. 68. He'd scored 68 out of 100. Not perfect, not even particularly good by some standards, but he'd passed. More than passed. He'd improved by 36 marks. Mrs. Deshmukh smiled at him from the front of the classroom and Ravi smiled back. This time, he didn't need to walk 15 kilometers to say thank you. This time, staying after class to help clean the blackboard said it just fine. But the impact of that walk didn't end there. His mother, who had always been quiet about the family's struggles, started speaking up more. She joined a women's self-help group in the village. She said Ravi's determination had inspired her. His father started saving more deliberately, putting aside money each week specifically for Ravi's education. You're going to go further than me, he told Ravi one evening. We'll find a way. Even his little sister changed. She started studying harder. When Ravi asked her why, she said, if you can do hard things, I can do hard things too. Years passed. Ravi kept studying. He kept failing sometimes and succeeding sometimes and learning from both. When he was in 10th grade, he scored well enough to get into a good high school in Pune. When he was in 12th grade, he scored high enough to get into an engineering college with a scholarship. The day the acceptance letter came, the first person he wanted to tell was Mrs. Deshmukh. He went to his old school, found her in the same classroom. I got in, he told her, breathless. Engineering college. Full scholarship. Mrs. Deshmukh's face lit up with genuine joy. I never doubted you would. 4 years later, when Ravi graduated with his engineering degree, Mrs. Deshmukh sat in the audience, invited personally by him. She clapped louder than anyone when his name was called. After the ceremony, Ravi found her in the crowd. Thank you for coming. I wouldn't have missed this, she said. Look at you. Look at what you've become. Because of you, Ravi said. No, because of you. I just planted the seed. You're the one who chose to grow. Years later, Ravi started a small foundation with friends from college. They identified talented students from poor families and helped them with tutoring and supplies. The foundation had a name, Seeds That Grow. On the wall of their small office, there was a plaque. It read, in memory of a 15-kilometer walk that taught us gratitude isn't just something you say. It's something you become. One Saturday, many years after that walk, Ravi drove back to Wagholi. Mrs. Deshmukh was older now, her hair more gray than black, but her eyes still had that same warmth. She'd retired from teaching but still tutored students at her home. I wanted to show you something, Ravi said, pulling out his phone. He showed her photos of the students his foundation had helped. 23 students so far, all from poor families, all refusing to give up. They sat in her garden, drinking tea, talking about students past and present. And Ravi realized something he'd known for a while but had never quite put into words. That walk 15 years ago hadn't been just about saying thank you. It had been about learning that gratitude isn't a transaction. It's not something you do once and check off a list. Gratitude is a way of living. It's about taking the gifts people give you and passing them forward. It's about becoming the kind of person who plants seeds in others, just like someone planted them in you. Mrs. Deshmukh had planted a seed in him all those years ago, and now that seed had grown into a tree, dropping seeds of its own. As Ravi drove back to Mumbai that evening watching the sun set over the fields, he thought about that 12-year-old boy with blistered feet and a heart full of gratitude. That boy had walked 15 kilometers to say thank you, not knowing that the real journey was just beginning. Gratitude isn't a destination you reach. It's a path you walk, sometimes for 15 kilometers, sometimes for a lifetime, but always forward, always growing, always planting seeds for someone else to find. The boy who walked 15 kilometers to say thank you grew up to build bridges. Bridges between poverty and possibility, between doubt and determination, between where people are and where they dream of going. And on the wall of his office, next to his framed degree, hung a worn mathematics book and a simple reminder: gratitude is the bridge we build back to those who helped us cross over. Not because we're obligated to cross back, but because we remember when someone built a bridge for us and we want to build bridges for others. All grateful, all growing, all remembering where they came from.